I did mention this before, but like I wanted to bring you on to speak specifically kind of around youth basketball, because that's what I kind of see you doing primarily on Instagram. So before we kind of get into that, I just want to ask you a little bit about what's your background with your own basketball training, kind of when did you get started? And then after that, just kind of talk about like why you specifically got into youth basketball training as kind of your specialty or niche.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So yeah, I kind of growing up, I played all the sports. I played every sport that my school had. I was always like a gym rat. I'd go to the gym at lunch hour. So I was always super interested in all the sports and working out and everything. But by far, my favorite sport was always basketball.
Mm-hmm.
I did a bunch of basketball camps as a kid, and that was like my passion. I was like obsessed with basketball. So throughout the years, just kind of got more and more into that. Took it pretty competitively. And then it's kind of funny because in junior high and high school, all I wanted to do was just dunk and jump higher and be a more explosive athletic basketball player. Like every basketball player, if you ask like any teenage kid who's playing basketball, if they want to dunk, that's probably like their main goal. So I did a few different jump programs in my basement. I have like a little mat set out and, annoying my parents with banging around and stuff, and did a bunch of jump programs. And I improved my athleticism, and I was doing cross country at the time a lot of long distance running to train for basketball, because I thought that would kind of be the key that would make me more athletic, which when it came to playing a game, like I could play a full game. I had good stamina, but when it came to that explosiveness and that jumping and that quick first step, I just didn't have that because I wasn't training it properly. And I didn't realize this until years and years down the road. So when I graduated high school, I couldn't dunk. I dunked one time in warm up on a rim that was like bent down.
With
and,
a beanie bag or a volleyball or something.
Dodgeball.
Yeah.
It was like, it was kind of one of those things where I'd worked towards dunking and jumping higher, and I had improved my vertical, but just hadn't got to that level that I wanted to be at. And then it wasn't until after I finished high school, moved out, I was living on my own in Lethbridge, and wasn't going to college yet. I was just working for a couple years, and I kind of just started hitting the gym consistently. Growing up in a smaller town, I didn't really have access to a ton of gyms or coaches, and just access, like this was before social media. You couldn't just like hop on Instagram or YouTube and get all these nuggets and stuff. There's a lot of good stuff, a lot of bad stuff out there too these days. But
yeah,
I was watching like the old original YouTube videos. And so then once I graduated high school, was hitting the gym on my own, started to kind of lift heavy, experiment with some things, learn some things, and then worked for 2 years, and then decided I wanted to go to college. So in those 2 years that I had been just training and working on my own, I completely transformed my athleticism. I was jumping, like getting my elbow to the rim, whereas before I'd barely been able to grab the rim, couldn't dunk. Now I was like dunking with ease. And I was just like, holy smokes. Like I didn't think, like I was like, I tried to do this for years, and I couldn't improve my vertical and explosiveness, and then just did it in a couple of years just with training more properly, doing some right things. So that kind of, anyways, long story short, kind of sparked my interest, where I was like, if I can transform my athleticism like this myself, like I can absolutely help other people do this. So that's kind of where that started. And then I ended up walking onto a high level college basketball team after not having any looks out of high school, just because I wasn't physically, athletically strong and fast enough. But then over those couple of years of training, I was able to get myself to where I walked onto the team. I was like one of the more athletic guys. And then it just kind of went up from there. And then over the years, that's kind of where I continued to refine and work on my own training. And I was just like, man, like it is completely possible to transform your body and athleticism and health. And to experience that myself was pretty motivating. That I was like, I think I want to do this for a career and help other people do this with sport and just with life as well too. So,
oh, that's awesome, man. So when you say that you were doing the right things, like comparing that to your high school training, what was the difference? I'm just thinking that maybe because you were doing the long distance running, maybe it was just too much volume as a whole? Or so what were some of the differences between your high school strength-based training to the strength training you were doing in college and afterwards?
Sure. Yeah, great question, man. I was absolutely doing just too much low intensity volume and not enough high intensity or strength work. So I was doing like, you know, jump repetition for like 20, 30, 40, 50 reps or like 100 rep little hops and stuff, which there's a time and a place for those. Those are important to develop like some elastic and springy properties in the body. But you have to be able to, you have to combine that with some proper strength training, like actually lifting heavy weight, some proper resistance training, and explosive plyometrics. Like I was never maxing out and jumping as high as I possibly could, other than basically just trying to jump up and touch the rim or whatever. So just doing some proper loaded plyometrics, some proper heavy lifting, squats, squat variations, Bulgarian split squats, lunges, step ups, that kind of stuff, deadlifts, RDLs, just really developing the posterior chain and some loaded jumps. So really just kind of adding in some more of the high intensity and strength work, combining with the plyometrics. A lot of these like at home jump programs are a lot of plyometrics, which is awesome, but they're kind of lacking out on the strength. And then as well, just form and technique. Like you can do all the exercises you want in the world, but if the form is not ideal and if you're not getting the intent that you want, then just kind of leaving some gains on the table. So it was a long process, but yeah.
And I imagine too, like in basketball, like a high school basketball athlete, they're doing a lot of the kind of springy, jumpy stuff already in practice,
Totally.
in games. So if you're doing that outside the gym, it just ends up being too much. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And this is notorious for injuries. I went through it. I feel like a lot of basketball athletes go through it. Just notorious for ankle and knee injuries. Tons of injuries just from rolled tweaks, landing on feet, that kind of stuff. And a lot of that comes from like when people are under fatigue, and then as well just like a lack of training that properly to prevent injury. But yeah, totally. Like every time you're on the court, it's a ton of like springy, jumpy plyometrics and running and stuff. So you're getting a ton of that as a basketball athlete. I think a lot of basketball athletes just aren't getting that like heavy strength stimulus to kind of counterbalance that quick springiness on the court that they get a lot of. Yeah.
So I guess I'm safe to say that when you're working with kind of someone who's interested in improving their vertical, you probably focus primarily on building strength and incorporating some sort of like progressive element to the plyometrics and weight training. Can you go into a little bit of depth around that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. So one of the biggest things, a lot of athletes that come in, there'll be athletes kind of from all over the spectrum. What I kind of start with someone is, first of all, just kind of identifying where they're at right now, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, what their performance gaps are, and what we need to work on. So kind of identifying where they're coming in at on the force velocity spectrum, or just in general, kind of where they're at with their athleticism. So if I get say like a high school athlete who's a bigger, bulkier guy, maybe he's like more of a football player, but loves basketball as well and wants to really take basketball to the next level. Maybe he's super strong. He's got a ton of strength, but what he's lacking is that like explosiveness, that springiness. That quickness on the first step, which maybe he's not a guard, he might not need to be the most explosive, but so what we'll do is we'll work on improving his strengths. So we'll work on maximizing his strength and loading him up and building that up. But at the same time, we're going to focus on conditioning him to be more springy, more elastic, more bouncy, and kind of training those qualities with plyometrics and different progressions through that. And then a lot of times, the most basketball athletes that come in, you picture a typical junior high school athlete. They're going through a growth spurt. They're long, they're lanky, they're skinny. A lot of them, it's like getting in enough food and then strengthening them up so that they have that strength to play at that next level. So for a lot of those guys are super springy, super quick, explosive, can change direction, can have a good stamina, can play a lot of minutes. But when it comes down to like finishing through contact or just being strong and explosive or playing at that next level of college or university or pro, where you're going up against full grown men and you're just a teenager, to really get that strength level up so that you're able to compete. For myself personally, that was the biggest difference from high school to college, was like skill level. There's guys are more skilled, but in general, like guys are way bigger and stronger. In fact, like you're getting the biggest, strongest guys off of other teams that make it to that next level. So the athleticism and the physicality and the strength is huge for a lot of these guys that are like finishing up their growth spurts and aren't necessarily the biggest, bulkiest. But we also want to encourage those springy athletic tendencies. I don't want to bulk them up and lose any of that speed and that springiness at the same time. So
yeah, I was in kind of the next question I was going to ask was like, how do you balance those two characteristics? Because obviously there's some positive benefits from being longer and lankier and springier, and you don't want to take that away because that's almost like, in a way, their strength.
Totally. Absolutely. Yeah. So it's exactly like that. So working on improving so whether that's if they're springy, working on maximizing that and really improving that and progressing that, or if they're already coming in super strong, not ignoring that, but maximizing and building on that, and then filling in those gaps. So exactly like you said, like whatever that gap is, I might have say if I work, I got 4 athletes in a group, maybe 2 of them are bigger, stronger, and they need more of that explosiveness and that springiness, and maybe 2 of them are skinnier, springier, but they need that strength. So I'll get them doing slightly different programs, similar, but the focus will be more on strength for the skinnier guys and then more on springiness and speed for the bigger guys. But still, also, I like to sprinkle in a little bit of everything through most of my programs so that you're not really ignoring anything at any given time.
Yeah,
you're sprinkling in enough just to maintain those qualities and those properties. And then kind of having that different focus. Also depending on the phase, right? So if they're in season and they're playing games, they have practice every day, just basically doing enough to help them stay healthy, help them maintain. And then off season, we can really build and focus on like adding some mass and some strength and really going through like a growth phase there.
How long is a typical off season for kind of these youth basketball players? Is it a good amount of time? Does it give you enough time to build a good strength, muscle mass foundation?
Yeah, so you know what, with basketball these days, so there's always something going on for whether it's like club basketball, school season, camps, training, going down and doing camps or little trips to the States. So a lot of these basketball athletes in Calgary are playing almost year round. So for some of them, they're playing half the year. Some of them, they're playing pretty much year round.
Yeah.
But that being said, there is typically going to be a few months where they have a little bit more time. So kind of depending on each athlete and where they're at and their plan for the summer and whatnot. But typically throughout the summer, that's the biggest off season for a lot of these athletes when they're able to really kind of focus and not in school. So really able to, like some of these guys, leave like grade 10 and they come back in grade 11. They've grown a couple inches. They've put on a lot of strength and size. So the off season kind of during those summers is some guys have pretty exciting to see they come back just like transformed.
Yeah, definitely. Do you feel like in terms of like these athletes that are kind of playing year round, that's in a way can be a detriment to them because there seems like they're specializing quite early in terms of basketball? Do you see that being a problem in practice?
Yeah, so that's definitely something that's a hot topic of conversation, a debate, because the whole idea of like, if someone wants to be a good basketball player, they're like, hey, 10 years old, we got to go to this camp and then we got to play school and then club and then we got to do all these other training sessions, which is great. But I think there is a sweet spot and you want to really maximize on as many sports as possible until a certain age, because there's so many characteristics that you can develop in terms of like coordination, speed, change of direction, even just understanding different sports and the rules. Maybe if you're playing soccer, but you want to play basketball, soccer is really going to help you with your footwork. Maybe if you're doing martial arts, but you want to play basketball, like martial arts is really going to help you with like your ground game, like getting low, bailing, landing properly, just having like functional strength to twist and turn and that kind of stuff. Gymnastics to be able to like learn and jump and learn how to jump and land and bail and just get comfortable with the body. So I think like, and I would encourage for for all parents and young athletes to do as many sports as possible when you're young. And then get to that age like 13, 14, 15, when things start to get a little bit more serious. And then especially in like high school, 16, 17, 18, things get pretty serious and bigger time commitments. So I would say until you're kind of like, mid-teens, for a lot of those athletes, like take advantage of as many sports as possible, develop as much coordination and get comfortable in all these different movement patterns and sports. And those will help you to be a better basketball athlete. And then also just to be more all around coordinated. Like we all know that guy that's just like good at everything, a lot of that probably just comes from playing a lot of sports and doing a lot of stuff growing up. There's key developmental windows when we grow up where if we are specialized too early, you're just missing out on developing certain movement patterns. So definitely a big fan of playing all the sports and all the different activities and not specializing too early. But and then even when guys do specialize, still doing something fun on the off days, like playing different sports and just messing around and keeping it fun.
Is that something you do in like your strength sessions? Is incorporate some maybe other kind of sports or activities that kind of develop these other skills just to keep things fun, but also kind of develop other characteristics outside of what you would be kind of doing in basketball?
Yeah. In my sessions with the basketball athletes, I will throw in some different, we'll do a bunch of different like races, different games, like agility games and stuff like that. So not necessarily like playing different sports, but doing different activities that's not necessarily like, okay, this is like specifically for basketball players. It's going to make you better on this. Just general movement and games and drills to help with movement, whether it's like even like crawling, doing weird little like low walks just to work on getting comfortable being low. And yeah, like just all different types of movement that you'd just be like it kind of just looks like, like a kid just kind of playing around in an open room or something, hopping, rolling, changing direction, crawling, jumping, that kind of stuff. But yeah, really just like getting these athletes used to moving in different ways and just getting them familiar with their bodies. So
that's awesome. Yeah. Because like nowadays, I think that's even more important than it was 10, 20 years ago. Because like us growing up, we'd spend a lot of time outside playing with our friends, just doing a bunch of random things that would maybe incorporate these kind of some of these activities that you're speaking of. But now if people are just kind of on their phones playing video games, they're missing out on these things that, like you said, can be very important during those earlier years for building that athleticism.
For sure. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think I'm glad that I think we hit a sweet spot, man. I think we missed out on I mean, there's a lot of tools that they have with social media and stuff that kids can use these days, but man, I couldn't imagine being a 12 or 13-year-old with a phone and access to social media and apps and all this stuff, and just how hard it is to not waste time on our phones as an adult. I couldn't imagine growing up with that as a kid. But yeah, I mean, for a lot of these athletes, and a lot of these youth, it's just so much of it is, if you want to be a better athlete, like these days, just like put the phone down, get outside, go play pickup, run around, play different sports with your friends, like go for bike rides. And in general, yeah, huge fan of sunlight, as you know, like just getting outdoors and just being active. And I think that honestly, there's a huge aspect of that starts with youth. If a kid can see their parents working out and exercising and playing sports and doing their thing, they just want to be like mom and dad. Like they'll literally, like you see kids all the time just stand beside their parents and start mimicking what they're doing in the weight room or whatever. So I think instilling it young is super important for a lot of these kids to kind of develop that passion, that desire to play sports and be good.
Definitely. No, that's some great advice. I want to kind of go back into some of the strength training stuff. So this is kind of like a highly debated topic nowadays around like what exercises translate to the basketball court in terms of strength development. What is your opinion on that? Is there specific lifts like the deadlift or the barbell back squat or the trap bar that you find kind of be most beneficial for youth basketball players trying to get some sort of transfer to their sport? Or do you think it's more about just building general capabilities across different things like strength, power, etc., that they can kind of apply to their sport?
Yeah, that's a great question, man. I think there's a lot of focus these days. Like everyone's like obsessed with sports specific movements and sports specific lifts and everything, which I
Yeah.
think that term has almost just gotten hijacked to, just like a lot of terms these days. But I think sports specific stuff is important because you do want to obviously keep in mind what you're training for, and you're at the end of the day you're going to train a football player different than a basketball player, different than a jiu-jitsu athlete or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think a lot of the principles are the same. In general, we want to improve strength. We want to improve like stamina, power, coordination in general. And then there's going to be different focuses beyond that. But yeah, I think like for basketball athletes specifically, like you said, a few of the main lifts, like I think squats for sure. Now that doesn't necessarily mean like a barbell back squat. Like that could be loading up goblet squats, front squats. I really like starting off on front squats to develop the posture before we just start loading up the back squats. Hex bar squats or hex bar deadlifts, Bulgarian split squats, step ups, lunges, like any type of squat or lunge variation. I think all of those are super important, especially the single leg work for a lot of basketball athletes, because so much of basketball is cutting, planting, jumping, changing direction off of the one leg. So a lot of unilateral exercises. And I think it's huge to develop the posterior chain. So a lot of RDLs, hip thrusts, a lot of back work and pull work in general. And I would say like not necessarily like one or two, or like if there's a few specific lifts, I would say principles, like you said, the getting strong with your compound lifts, and then focusing on having some push and pull strength, and then sprinkling in plyometrics, some loaded plyometrics, races, change of direction, that stuff. So my sessions are pretty structured. So it's kind of a full body session. It's not like we're doing a leg day one day, like an upper body, like a push day one day and a pull day another day. Most of my sessions are full body. So we'll kind of start off, get warm, do some speed and power work at the beginning when guys are fresh and their nervous systems are able to fire on full cylinders. And then we get into heavy compound lifts. So that's going to be squats, lunges, sleds, hex bar, that kind of stuff. And then we'll kind of go into the accessory or the upper body push, pull, and finishers and stuff like that. So I think in general, just having a good combination. But I think the biggest key is just progressive overload, knowing where someone's at and starting them, not, if someone hasn't lifted before, not trying to get into it too quick and do anything too fancy, but just really just focusing on building those fundamentals, like mastering the fundamental movement patterns and just really strengthening and mastering those patterns and those fundamentals. And then you can have fun later on.
Yeah, that seems like the common theme for like all levels. It's like it always comes back to the basics. Let's make sure that we're doing the basics really well. Even as you get more advanced, more intermediate in these sports, the more you do these things, the less you get away from the basics. So like at the end of the day, it's like, how do we get back to the basics? How do we make sure we're doing everything with good technique, good form, right?
Yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah, and I see videos of Steph Curry, Anthony Davis, like all these guys on Instagram, like a lot of these videos of their trainers working with them, they're doing basic fundamental stuff. They're mastering their deadlifts, they're mastering their split squats, and it's not anything crazy. Kids will see them doing some clip and they'll be like, "Oh, this is what I need to do to be like Steph Curry." But honestly, kids, at the end of the day, the pros are mastering the fundamentals. So I think you nailed it. That's the biggest thing, is don't get caught up in the crazy looking stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And how many, for like someone who's kind of just getting into it, like how many days per week do you recommend they kind of get that's required to see some sort of positive change to their game?
Yeah, great question. So, for example, I've worked with some athletes that are, just focused on school and they like play video games for fun and they're not doing any other sports. So for someone like that, I would say just getting in, doing something a few days a week. So start with like 2 or 3 days a week of just doing something like 15 or 20 minutes. Maybe that's even just like going for a walk, doing a few push-ups and lunges at home, and like maybe skipping rope for a couple minutes or something. For athletes that are more serious, say you're, a junior high or high school basketball athlete, you're trying to get to that next level. You're already training, playing a few times a week. You're doing something most days. Maybe you're working out already. I would say if you're at that level where you're able to hit the gym consistently, or you have been hitting the gym consistently, I would say just progressively overloading. So if you are getting sore for more than a couple of days and you really feel like it's slowing you down and you have to, you're just feeling sore and like overtrained, that is not doing you a service. That is not doing you a favor. So overtraining for youth basketball athletes, I think, is a big issue. A lot of times, like, they'll have a couple weeks off for Christmas, maybe play ball with friends a couple times, but then just jump back into it. So there's these huge fluctuations and this roller coaster of huge amounts of volume in a short amount of time, and then not much volume for a couple weeks, or maybe for the summer. Some of them, are just on vacation or not training, and then they come back in. It's like all of a sudden basketball season. So I think the biggest thing is listening to your body, not overtraining. The whole idea of like more pain, or no pain, no gain, and just like train harder. And David Goggins is go, harder, harder. Not necessarily the best for everyone if you're at that level, but for a lot of people, the overtraining is going to take away, especially if you're trying to train and make yourself more explosive. That's very important to not overdo with the volume. So keeping the quality high and the quantity at a level that you're able to progressively overload. So for some people, that might be starting off with a few minutes or 15 minutes, a few days a week. For some people, that might be 4 or 5 sessions a week. But honestly, anything over like 5 weight room sessions a week for a basketball athlete might be overdoing it. I would say just don't overtrain for a lot of those young basketball athletes. Just remember that it's the long-term progression, the consistency over months and months and years, rather than just going hard for a couple months and falling off and then making it back up and going hard for a couple months. The key is the consistency.
Yeah. And when you have those big kind of swings in workload from going from nothing to high amounts to nothing to high amounts, I imagine that's when you see a lot more injuries as well.
Tons of injuries, man. Yeah. Notorious. Like I can't tell you how many times, after an athlete's been sick and they haven't trained for a couple weeks, and they're like, oh, I just got back into it though and played every day this week. Or after, a week of like reading break or the summer or whatever, almost a guarantee. And you see this with adults too, that like don't play basketball for a year. And then they're like, oh, there's an alumni tournament. And then they go and they like or something. So just in general, like knowing where you're at and the consistency and not those huge fluctuations. Those huge fluctuations absolutely will cause injuries. It definitely increases your probability of getting injured. So stay consistent, do something every day.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, that's why it's so important. Like when you're having these downtimes, it's not like, or when you're deloading, it's not like you do absolutely nothing. You still have to keep some sort of baseline strength and conditioning into your life, even though, like you said, if it's maybe doing some stuff at home, push-ups, lunges, rear foot elevated split squats, all those things, just to kind of keep some sort of baseline so that when you do go back, you don't have these massive spikes in volumes and run into injuries. So
100%. Yeah. The consistency of doing something, like even on off days or rest days, just going for a walk. Like I know you're a huge proponent of walks for recovery and blood flow. And it's literally, it's about making it a lifestyle rather than just going through huge spurts up and down. So
yeah, I saw one of your Instagram posts where you have a daily kind of morning ritual where you're doing some sort of activity, and it doesn't matter if it's a training day or an off day. You just have kind of like a baseline movement, kind of not a ritual essentially.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah. The consistency of some daily movement routine, even if that's just 10, 15 minutes of some stretching and some mobility, just, or, if you hit a few pull-ups and push-ups, if you do a set of push-ups and pull-ups every single day, it takes 1 minute. Like you will never lose the ability to do push-ups and pull-ups. You'll always be able to do that, So many people just go months and months and months and years, like how many people after they turn 30 sprint again in their life? Like less than half, I would say. So
I'd say way less than that. Yeah.
less than half. Yeah. So I mean, if you haven't sprinted or done anything, obviously, I use the phrase, don't use it, you lose it. And if you use it, you'll never lose it. So yeah, big part of the lifestyle. Yeah.
I like that. So obviously there's going to be times where people don't adhere to what we're talking about in terms of, of kind of doing things on a daily basis. So what are some kind of practices you have around treating some of these injuries that you're faced with? Do you have some kind of strategies that you can implement to maybe help them get back to 100% faster than just kind of doing nothing at all?
Like return to play from injuries, different, especially like knee and ankle injuries.
Yeah, let's talk specifically, because I know that is such a big thing in basketball, is the knee and the ankle based injuries. They're going to happen even if things are perfect on paper. We are staying active every day, but we're going to run into these things just based on stress. And I imagine of some of these school teams and club teams, like they're doing more than what the body's capable of. Maybe they're not eating enough, etc. So like, what are some things that you like to kind of include in your strength and conditioning programs to just make sure that they're staying healthy?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So my approach is very holistic based. So I've kind of learned if you're over the years, if you're crushing it in the gym, your training sessions are awesome, but you're coming home, you're not eating properly, you're not fueling properly, your sleep is trash, your stress levels are through the roof, you're not recovering properly. Like, really doesn't matter what you're doing in the gym, because you're going to be kind of spinning your tires. You're leaving so much on the table the other 23 hours of the day. So very, very important. And I think most trainers kind of understand this. The longer you're in the game, you're like, oh yeah, working out is great, but it's so important. It's crucial to recover. Like, you won't get results if the recovery and the lifestyle practices aren't there. So for basketball athletes specifically, and especially like, busy youth basketball athletes with school and exams and work and everything going on, I think recovery and sleep is one of the biggest, most important things, especially in our modern day lifestyle. And this is something I'm still working on myself as well too. I think a lot of people struggle with just being able to wind down, get that good quality sleep and recovery, staying off the screens the last hour before bed, really allowing the nervous system to downregulate and kind of get into that parasympathetic rest and digest recovery mode. So I'd say sleep is honestly one of the biggest factors. Hydration in general, most people are dehydrated. So just, being adequately hydrated in order to, for our body just to operate properly.
Yep.
I mean, that's even like cognitive function, your mood, risk of injury and repair and everything. Recovery goes up too. So
what's your opinion on, sorry for cutting you off. What's your opinion on kind of electrolytes as well as hydration, not just drinking straight water? Do you kind of incorporating that?
Yeah. And trying to avoid tap water, getting good quality, mineral water, or like a good quality filtered water. Yeah, absolutely huge. And then, in terms of recovery, doing what you need. A lot of basketball athletes will, and I've done this in college, I would, strap on the old bags of ice on the knees, takes away some soreness. And a lot of NBA players will still do this. And it's just kind of like one of those old school mentalities, kind of a lingering myth that's been out there, the whole RICE, rest, ice, compression, elevation. Even the doctor who coined that term has came out years ago and said ice is actually not the most beneficial for, right after a game, or if you have a sprained ankle, or if your knees are a little bit sore. A lot of time, and I know I've heard you talk about this as well too, we don't want to ice and down-regulate that natural hormetic response that the body's giving us right after. That's important to help with the recovery process. So for basketball athletes, or any athlete out there who's like used to like icing or hitting the ice bath right after a strength training session, or icing up the knees after a basketball, or the ankle after rolling it, ice can be a good tool at sometimes, but a lot of times it's not going to be the best tool. So using heat can be a good tool. If the ankle's a little bit sore and you rolled it, I'd recommend just using a heating pad or contrasting warm and cold rather than icing the ankle, because that's actually going to encourage blood flow and get all the important properties in the blood that's going to help with recovery to that injury site.
Mm-hmm.
And then just in general, like managing stress, managing workload. If you were up late studying and had an exam and then, didn't get much food in, but you have this big training session scheduled, like, hey, maybe you got to adapt and like take that day off, or modify it and just do more of a recovery focused session rather than overdoing it. Or maybe if you're showing up to practice as a basketball athlete, maybe just telling your coach, hey coach, like I had a busy day. I got this and this and this going on.
Mm-hmm.
Just letting them know, not being like, oh, I'm gonna, slack today, but just communicating that and letting the coach and the trainers know, so they can help be on the same page. But I think in general, just like managing stress, taking care of the body through nutrition, sleep, and hydration, and getting in enough protein. I guess is the one thing I'd say about nutrition is 90% of people, I would say, don't get enough protein in. And as you know, if you're not getting enough protein, you're just not optimizing that recovery, and then just going to be more likely to get injured as well if you don't get enough protein in. So
yeah, those are all great advice, definitely. Do you have any, for your athletes, do you use any kind of key KPIs, key performance indicators for monitoring recovery? Like, obviously this might be a little bit kind of more higher level, but like, are you looking at like resting heart rate? Are you looking at potentially heart rate variability for some of your kind of athletes that maybe are a little bit more serious and want to take it to that next level, college level, pro eventually?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so for some of the more advanced guys, I think using tools like heart rate variability, or just like a training readiness score of just kind of how you're feeling in the morning, based on your sleep, nutrition, hydration, soreness levels, everything like that, I think is important for some of those high level guys. Super, super important, especially if it's your career, or if you're trying to play at that next level. Really being aware and developing awareness around how your body's feeling and what you're capable of doing in the gym or on the court that day. For a lot of the youth basketball athletes, I start the session just by chatting with them for a couple minutes and just kind of getting a feel for where they're at. How's your day? How's your sleep? How much food have you had today? How you feeling overall? How's the energy? How's your last practice or game? How you feeling? Any soreness? And just a quick check in while they're kind of getting their warm up in.
Yep.
Just kind of feeling out where they're at, and and then a lot of times we'll have to modify something for them based on what's going on, or maybe they had to tweak their ankle. It's not injured, it's not bad or anything, but it's like a slight tweak. So we're not going to go hard on change of direction that day, and we're going to focus on some recovery. So
yeah. I think that you said before, the communication aspect with the athlete and the coach and the personal trainer is so important. I think it's way more valuable than the actual tracking metrics themselves. Obviously, it can be nice to kind of validate what we're feeling subjectively, but if we can help kind of teach an athlete some of the signs that they should be looking for to know whether or not they're kind of ready to perform at a high level, is going to be way more valuable over someone's long-term athletic career and then just like regular life after sport as well.
100%, man. Yeah. And I really like to empower my athletes and help encourage that awareness building, because it's so huge. It's like, it's awesome. Like, if they're training with me 3 days a week for an hour, that's awesome. But there's 23 hours in every day that they're not with me. So really it's about empowering, like whether it's my in-person youth basketball athletes or my guys in their 30s, 40s, 50s, I train online. It's about empowering them to build that awareness and that accountability within themselves. So for, with nutrition, for example, most people will sit down and have a meal and have no idea how many calories are in it, how many grams of carbs, fats, proteins. There's no awareness around that. So just helping someone build some awareness around being able to, over the weeks and months, being able to sit down, look at a plate and kind of know, okay, this is roughly this is about 40 to 50 grams of protein right here. And just to know roughly what you're about to put in your body. And then like recovery or mobility and readiness scores, just like empowering these athletes and these people to really take accountability in your own body. Like your body is your vehicle. It's your one vehicle that you get for life. So just teaching people just how to kind of check in and know what's kind of the best for them to do that day. So
no, that's some good advice, definitely. And
yeah.
I like you had a post about kind of how you talk about not necessarily being neurotic or being obsessive over these, like knowing exactly how much protein you're taking in and carbs and stuff. But like you said, it's nice to have some level of awareness. And then once you have that level of awareness, then you can make better decisions going forward.
Totally.
And I think the people that are more neurotic, like the bodybuilders and physique-based athletes, it ends up being more of a negative for just the regular general population person if they're obsessively
Right.
tracking every little morsel piece of food that they're eating. But if they can get in a general ballpark area of kind of what they should be getting, I think they'll probably get 95% of the benefit, 90% of the benefits.
Yeah, totally. I think a big part of it comes down to like the best thing for you and results and progress is going to be the thing that you can do consistently. So it's like if you can be like 90% dialed 90% of the time, that's going to be much better than being 100% dialed like 60% of the time. You know what I mean? So just generally trying to do most of the things right most of the time. But yeah, it's, everyone's got busy lives and stuff happens and comes up. So just being flexible and adapting with it. But absolutely, it's all about making it a lifestyle.
Absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about isometrics because that's kind of like something that's talked about in the athletic communities around injury prevention. How are you incorporating isometrics into these athletes' training for building maybe resiliency or overcoming injuries, those sorts of things?
Yeah, good question, man. Yeah, I love it. So I was just doing some isometric or some pause reps with my athletes yesterday, and we were talking about this as well. A lot of times, so as part of a warm up, I'll throw in some iso lunges or basically like pause lunges. You're just holding the bottom part of a lunge position for 20, 30 seconds, or the bottom part of a squat or push up or whatever it is. But yeah, I like isometrics as a tool for developing resiliency with minimizing risk of injury.
Yeah.
So really good tool for warming up. If a basketball athlete, for example, has bad knees or weaker knees, and they tend to get sore just from a lot of pounding, a lot of jumping, running, changing direction. As we build up their strength and make those knees better, a big part of their warm up will be like including a couple isometrics. So it's a really good way to get the muscles engaged and fired, but you're not loading the joints a ton. You're not moving the joints through ranges of motion back and forth and putting a lot of stress on them. So a really good way I find to get the joints and the muscles kind of engaged and warmed up in an easy way to incorporate in a warm up or as a finisher, like at the end of a set, just really trying to maximize an isometric hold. Yeah, so really good for warming up and preventing injury, just for strengthening up those joints and muscles without loading the joints and putting a ton of stress on them. And then when people are just getting started, for a lot of beginners, a lot of the movement patterns might not necessarily be there yet. So if we can just kind of break down the movement and pause. So rather than repping out the full movement, you just pause at the bottom, hold that for 10 seconds, and then we'll do the other side. And then we can really strengthen the tough part, because with a lunge or a squat, the toughest part is going to be the bottom position. So if we can just strengthen up holding that bottom position, that those weaker points, and really for basketball athletes, especially like getting strong in those low positions is really important. So it's a good, safe, effective way to do that, I feel.
Yeah. And also at the same time, I think it comes down to just like variability, because I imagine with most basketball athletes, they're moving very quickly, very explosively. They're not moving slow. So just by training that opposite end of the spectrum, we can make that person more resilient over time.
Exactly. Just like what we were talking about before, they're getting a lot of that springy, quick, explosive movement on the court. So just giving them some slow isometrics or slow eccentrics or whatever it is, just to balance out what they're basically not getting from sport. So
yeah. Some of my kind of older individuals, they have some knee issues, and I'll have them do the Spanish squats. Do do you know like the science behind what's happening at the tendon level, at the joint level, that causes that decrease in pain?
With Spanish squats specifically, with the band.
Yeah, because that's a version of an isometric, right? And I
Mhm.
imagine it's similar across all isometrics. Is there something happening at that tendon that's kind of making that pain signal go
Yeah,
down, or?
I've done Spanish squats a few times over the years. Not something that I do a ton, but I do like them, and I think they are a great tool.
Mhm.
There definitely are some tendon benefits. I know Jake Tura on Instagram, or Jake Tura. I don't know
Mhm.
if you follow him, but he's a great resource for a lot of these tendon and isometric questions and stuff. So I know he goes really deep into the weeds on the science behind the benefits to the tendons and everything. But yeah, as far as I understand, big benefit to strengthening up the tendons through the isometrics, but not super well versed on the specific mechanisms, I guess.
Yeah. I want to kind of shift a little bit now into kind of you've mentioned in the past stamina. Is this
Mm-hmm.
an issue that you're seeing commonly with basketball athletes? They just don't have enough gas, like
Mm-hmm.
their cardiovascular systems aren't well developed enough to kind of sustain performance over the course of an entire game?
Yeah, yeah, good question. So I think stamina is huge for basketball athletes. It's You run so much in basketball and soccer and a lot of these sports compared to other sports that's more start and stop.
Hmm.
So stamina is absolutely huge, and we tend to focus on training the different energy systems. So we do some explosiveness. I think it is important to have a well-rounded athlete. And then also, I'll say this before I get into it, is the more conditioning and just stamina you have, it's going to give you a bigger engine. So your capacity for work is going to be greater.
Hmm.
It's going to allow you to recover quicker in between sets and reps and on the court. And as well, it's just going to help you with your heart rate and just your overall system, like your body's functioning. So I think it's super, super important. So we will condition explosiveness tendencies in athletes. So high intensity plyometrics for low reps. So we're doing 5 jumps, but absolutely flat out as explosively as you can.
Hmm.
And then we'll touch on some more intermediate conditioning where it's kind of that middle ground of medium intensity. And then we'll do some long, slow intensity. With my sessions, I don't get them to, do slow intensity for half an hour while I just sit there and watch them. But I do encourage them, like, long walks or bike rides, or even just, you know, drills, doing drills at a medium intensity, not specifically like drills where you're trying to get more explosive, but maybe just some specific like ball handling drills where you're getting your heart rate up, you're getting a sweat on,
Hmm.
but you're getting those conditioning qualities as well. So I think it's important, especially for basketball athletes, not to make the mistake that I did of just doing a ton of long distance running. And my cardiovascular capacity is through the roof, and I can play full games and run my guy around the court and tire out my defender. But
Hmm.
when it comes to me actually like beating him off that first step, I just didn't have that explosiveness because I wasn't training my phosphocreatine or explosive system. Um, so I think it's really important to have that balance. For basketball athletes, you have to have the stamina because you can't be, dying hands on the knees in the fourth quarter, getting blown by just because you don't have that stamina.
Hmm.
But at the same time, can't just do a lot of like long, slow endurance work because then you're kind of conditioning your body to move at that sub maximal speed.
Hmm.
Then essentially you're conditioning your nervous system to not be as explosive. So when it does come time to be really explosive, you want to be able to have that strength and that power there. So yeah, I encourage the full, well-rounded kind of train in all three of those energy systems, and that's I think why it's good too for a lot of these athletes to play multiple sports because you just are naturally going to get those sprinkled in through different sports.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like nowadays zone two work has become so popular. The longer, slower,
Yeah.
hopping on the bike, hopping on the elliptical, and obviously there are benefits, like you said, but it's not the only thing that needs to be trained to have a well developed aerobic system or
Totally.
anaerobic system,
Yeah.
right? So.
Yeah. And there might be things like for an athlete, there might be things that you can do while you're getting that zone two, and you're improving a skill. So like maybe you're just like dribbling a basketball at a zone two rate, but now you just got in half an hour of ball handling at the same time, kind of thing, or whatever, right? Just as one example.
Being more efficient with your time.
Exactly. Stacking those habits in your favor.
Yeah. And then I also noticed that you do a lot of sled work. I imagine that kind of plays into the conditioning aspect as well.
Yeah.
The reverse sled drags, the forward sled drags. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So for anyone that's followed me or has trained with me, they know I love my sleds. So yeah, the sleds are a great tool. Sled pushes, sled drags, sideways like lateral drags, bunch of different options. But yeah, such a great tool. I think for a few reasons. I won't use them specifically as like a conditioning tool, just like 5 minutes, as many pushes. But for like sled drags, for example, you're really conditioning the legs. Like we'll go lighter on the backward sled drags where you're really just getting a good leg burn. You're going for maybe a 2 minutes straight, just slow, steady, consistent. You're getting your heart rate up. You're getting some conditioning, but we're strengthening and targeting those legs exactly where you want to really strengthen up, especially the knees. And a big thing that I like about the sleds too is that it gets the foot and the ankle more involved compared to squats, deadlifts, lunges, where that foot's pretty much stationary and staying flat. With the sled, you're getting that toe off, you're getting that triple extension. So you're getting the hip extension and then coming through the knee and then through the ankle and the foot. And what I see with a lot of athletes and just a lot of people in general these days is a lot of weak feet and weak ankles. So the toe or the sleds are just one way to strengthen up that foot and ankle complex and just get that involved. And then as well, you're getting cardio, you're getting some upper body as well to be able to like brace and transfer that force through to the sled. And then for a lot of basketball athletes, I feel like the sleds are just an awesome tool to teach them how to apply force, rather than talking about like shin angle and hip position and torso angle and like foot striking patterns. If I just put them on a sled that's loaded up a little bit so it's hard for them to push, their body will naturally just coordinate and figure out how to kind of lean in and push. And then we do talk about things like I cue them on specific things to help them, but I think it's just a great tool and it's super safe too. You can load up a sled with 300 pounds. Worst case scenario, if someone can't push it, the sled just doesn't move, right? It's not like a big weight on you and risking an injury or a back injury or anything. So really good tool for teaching athletes how to use that positioning. And for like any athlete that's, doing any type of contact, like there's a lot of contact in basketball when you're driving in, you got to learn how to absorb contact, lean into guys, and take that contact. So it just really helps with positioning, developing the foot and ankle complex and some strength and just movement patterns of body positioning, which is huge.
No, there's so many benefits of the sled work thanks for pointing those things out. That's awesome.
You ever hit those for a warm up at all?
I do. I mostly do like the reverse sled drags. I should also start incorporating some of the forward though as well, because I imagine it also has some carryover to sprinting qualities as well, right?
I would say so for sure. Yeah.
What are some of you mentioned cueing on the sled push. What are some give me 3 of your kind of favorite cues you like to kind of tell someone when they're pushing a sled?
Yeah. So on a sled push, 3 cues, I'd say one of the biggest ones is maintaining posture. So you don't want to be like rounding through the back and just like muscling through, really having good, strong posture through the back, through the hips. So posture would be a big one.
Yeah.
And then full smooth steps. So rather than kind of like jerky, choppy steps, really encouraging athletes to get a full extension and really just working on that hip extension. So hip flexion and extension and really feeling that left versus right side and seeing if there's any differences or imbalances. If you can feel like one leg is easier to push with, or it's more lined up, or it's able to hit the ground harder, So really just, and this is kind of like what you're talking about with sprinting,
Mm-hmm.
it almost slows down your steps and allows you to develop awareness around imbalances or around like striking patterns and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So posture, smooth, full steps.
Mm-hmm.
And what would be another one? I would say, um, yeah, maintaining breathing is a big one. I feel
Yeah,
like
huge.
everything have a tendency to hold their breath. So
Mm-hmm.
keeping, like, if you're doing a sled push for 30 seconds, you might be able to get away with holding your breath for the first 10 seconds, but then it's going to catch up to you. So being able to maintain proper bracing and breathing under
Mm-hmm.
tension for things like sled pushes, I think is important. So
Mm-hmm. No, thank you. Those are some great cues for sure. And that's something that I see with a lot of my people. I did a post about this, is just like the breathing during sets is so important, because when we stop breathing, that's when we get more fatigued. That's when our form starts to break down. So if we can find ways to breathe more efficiently, we can
yeah,
end up doing more high quality work over the long run.
100%. Yeah. Unfortunately, our muscles need oxygen to contract. So it's like, yeah, it's like covering up the air intake on under the hood of a car. Like your engine's not going to work very well. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah, breathing super super important.
Well, I feel like we covered a lot of great stuff today. Is there anything
Absolutely.
specifically that you want to talk about that we haven't touched on yet in terms of youth development? It's okay if you can't think of anything, but like I said, this is a lot of great information for the audience.
Yeah, man. Yeah, great discussion, great questions in general, and yeah, thanks again for having me, man. I would say I think the one thing would be for youth basketball athletes would just be transitioning beyond that. So for a lot of athletes that might listen to this, or are in high school, junior high, high school, maybe they are at that college or university level. Um, I think just transitioning beyond sport into life is super, super important for a lot of these athletes I see. And that's kind of the online side of my business that I deal with, is working with retired athletes that used to play competitive sports, but now, working a busy 9 to 5 job,
Mm-hmm.
still playing men's league, like to get out snowboarding, hiking, running, whatever it is, biking, but they've just gained weight. They're sitting at a desk a lot of times. They've just lost that, but they still want to get out and like compete and have fun. So
Mm-hmm.
I would say just the aspect of continuing to make it a part of your lifestyle, and after athletes finish high school or college, not to lose that. And maybe you're not playing every day, but get out and play in a men's league like once a week, to still do something every day to allow you to, like, encourage you to do the things that you want to do, to allow you
Mm-hmm.
to do the things that you want to do. If you want to play basketball and snowboard and throw a ball around with your kids and go play basketball with your kids and all that kind of stuff, I think a huge part of quality of life comes from the ability to have to do those things that you enjoy doing,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of that comes from being able to be physically capable of doing it. So I
Mm-hmm.
see a lot of athletes that are like high level athletes in high school or university. By the time they get to their 30s, they've kind of let things slip with their health.
Mm-hmm.
So in general, just like never losing that like love for sport, for the game, for exercise, for fitness, for health, being able to just not let it completely slide. You don't have to, stay at an elite level of athleticism, but
Mm-hmm.
I just encourage, like I said before, if you don't use it, you won't lose it. Or if you don't use it, you lose it. If you use it, you'll never lose it. So just keep on doing something active and make it a part of the lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah,
Yeah, I feel like a lot of athletes who kind of hit those higher echelons, they get a little bit burnt out by the end. So when they're
yeah,
done, they just kind of they may put more of their attention towards their family or their
so,
careers, but then they neglect their health, and then we end up getting these people when they're in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and they're hurting. So do
yeah,
yourself a service and like try to find something that is enjoyable, that provides you some sort of health benefits, and touches on these different things that Phil has discussed with us today.
100%. Yeah. And I think a lot of athletes struggle with, they're like, after sport is done, they're like, oh, well, I'm not training for competition. I'm not training for sport. So they don't, it's like, they don't have something to train for to motivate them. So after that point, just transitioning is just about finding a new focus, like finding a new hobby that you enjoy to keep you motivated in the gym, or finding a friend that you like working out with or something. So just kind of finding that, pivoting into that next chapter of life is really important. So you don't have to end up, going through a struggle in your 20s and 30s.
Yeah. Sometimes I make a joke with some of my clients. They'll ask me like, "Why am I doing this?" I'm like,
yeah,
we're training so you don't die, essentially.
We're making you harder to kill.
Making you harder to kill.
Yeah, you're gonna live longer, harder to kill. Yeah, and I mean, what's the one quote talking about just like health and longevity? Something to do with basically like we have a life expectancy and like our lifespan, and then we have lifespan and health span. So we have a lifespan, but like a lot of people aren't really living their last 10 years of life. They're not mobile. They're not really able to do the things that they love. So if you're able to extend your health span and keep doing the things that you love into your 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, one of the most inspiring things for me is when I go snowboarding, I ride up the chairlift with some 80-year-old guy who's like, "Oh yeah, I'm here for 40 years." Like that gets me so fired up. And they're out there ripping down a mountain on skis in their 80s. And and they're always super sharp and super just like happy and positive. And it's pretty inspiring. It's just a huge correlation between health, happiness, longevity, and just taking care of your body. So mental health, physical health, it's all tied in. So
well, that's definitely a great message to kind of finish things up on. I'd love to have you back on again, and we can kind of get more into the specifics around how the training might change for someone a little bit older. But just for today, we'll stop things there.
absolutely.
Or here. Can you give us a little bit more information about where people can reach you for coaching, your Instagram, anything that you want to kind of plug?
You bet. Yeah. Thanks again for having me, Matt. We appreciate it, and would love to be back on and have another conversation. And I'm gonna keep listening to your other episodes. Those are awesome. For myself, biggest thing I'm active on is Instagram. So social media on Instagram is PJ Performance Training, PJ_performance_training. Check that out if you have any questions, or if you're interested in training or anything, if you're a basketball athlete, or just have any questions about the podcast or anything, shoot me a DM. And then my email as well is just Phil J, PHILJ @live.ca if you have any questions. And give me a follow. Got some good content on there. I always try to share some stuff for people. So appreciate you having me on, man. Looking forward to another discussion.
Anytime. Thanks again, man.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks, Maddie.